Let me tell you a story about loyalty, about sacrifice, about building something from nothing brick by brick, call by call, sleepless night after sleepless night, and then watching someone you called brother try to steal it all while smiling to your face. My name is Richard Calloway. I'm 53 years old. I live on 12 acres just outside Asheville, North Carolina, land that's seen more sunrises than most people see birthdays. There's a creek that cuts through the back pasture, and in the spring, the dogwoods bloom so white they look like ghosts holding candles. I built a little wedding venue out there called Whispering Oaks. Not for the money, though it pays the bills, but because Miriam, my late wife, always said our land had a soul. She believed people should say, "I do," somewhere that felt like truth, not plastic. She died 10 years ago in a logging accident, and I've carried her memory like a compass ever since. But this story isn't about Whispering Oaks. Not really. This story is about a company I co-founded with a man named Michael Dalton. We met in 2012 at a trade show in Charlotte. He was wearing a $3,000 suit and talking about disrupting legacy supply chains. I was in worn Carhartts, boots caked with red clay from fixing a busted septic line that morning. He laughed when I told him I ran a small off-grid solar installation business out of my barn. But then I showed him the prototype I'd built, a modular microgrid controller that could run a whole homestead on 80% less battery storage. His eyes lit up like he'd just found gold in a junkyard. "Richard," he said, clapping me on the shoulder, "you're sitting on a billion-dollar idea, and you don't even know it." I didn't care about billions. I cared about independence. About giving rural families the power to live off the land without begging the grid for mercy. But Michael? He saw scale. He saw venture capital. He saw exits and IPOs. Still, we shook hands. Right there, over lukewarm coffee and stale pastries, we made a pact. We'll build this together. Equal partners. Equal say. For the next 8 years, I lived that promise like scripture. I mortgaged my land, yes, my land. The only thing Miriam and I ever truly owned together, to fund the first round of R&D. I worked 18-hour days in a rented warehouse on the edge of town, soldering circuit boards with my own hands while Michael schmoozed investors in downtown lofts. I missed my daughter Lily's high school graduation because I was in Montana testing our system in sub-zero temperatures. I ate cold beans from a can more nights than I can count. And every time I wanted to quit, every time the doubt crept in like frost through a cracked window, I remembered Miriam's voice. "You build things that last, Richard. Not for glory. For good." Michael, meanwhile, became the face of the company. Dalton and Calloway Energy Solutions. He gave TED Talks. He wore cufflinks shaped like lithium-ion cells. He told reporters, "Richard's the genius in the garage. I'm just the guy who opens the door." People ate it up, and I let them, because I believed in him. Or maybe I just wanted to believe that loyalty meant something in this world. We grew fast, from 3 employees to 30, from a warehouse to a sleek office in Biltmore Park. We landed contracts with rural co-ops across the Southeast. Our tech was saving farms from blackouts, powering clinics in Appalachia, even keeping lights on in a Navajo community during a winter storm. I'd walk into those places, see a kid doing homework under an LED powered by our system, and feel that quiet pride, the kind that doesn't need a stage. Michael started calling me the quiet engine. I liked that. It felt true. But engines don't get invited to board meetings. Not at first, anyway. Then, about a year ago, things shifted. Michael began talking about professionalizing the company, bringing in strategic leadership. He hired a CFO, a slick guy named Marcus who wore sunglasses indoors and called me Chief like it was a joke. He started scheduling board calls without telling me. When I asked for the minutes, he'd say, "Oh, just housekeeping, Richard. Nothing you need to worry your hands over." I should have seen it coming. But I was busy installing a demo unit at a veterans retreat, teaching apprentices how to calibrate inverters, checking on Lily's wedding plans. She was engaged to a good man, solid kind, the kind who fixes your truck without being asked. I trusted Michael. Not because he deserved it, but because I needed to believe that after Miriam, after all the loss, I could still build something real with someone. Then came the email. Subject line: Special board meeting. Urgent action required. Date: October 14th, 2025. Time: 10 a.m. Location: Virtual, Zoom. It was sent at 8:47 p.m. the night before. No agenda. No warning. I called Michael. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "What's this about?" He didn't reply. The next morning, I logged in early, wore my best flannel, Miriam's favorite shade of forest green, and sat at my kitchen table, the one she sanded by hand. My coffee steamed beside me. Outside, the oaks whispered in the wind. The Zoom call started. Michael's face filled the screen: impeccable hair, crisp white shirt, calm smile. The other board members joined: 2 venture capitalists from Atlanta, a retired utility exec, and Marcus, the CFO, smirking like he knew a secret. "Thanks for joining, everyone," Michael said, voice smooth as bourbon. "We're here to address a critical governance issue." My stomach dropped. He went on, "Over the past year, it's become clear that Richard's hands-on approach, while admirable, is no longer aligned with our growth trajectory. His resistance to external capital, his insistence on controlling hardware design, his rural sensibilities, he actually said that, are holding us back." I sat there, silent. My fingers curled around my mug. "Effective immediately," he continued. "We're proposing a vote to restructure executive leadership. Richard Calloway will be transitioned to an advisory role with no operational authority. His equity will be diluted to 5%, vesting over 5 years, contingent on non-disparagement and full cooperation." One of the VCs cleared his throat. "Seconded." Another. "All in favor?" Hands raised on screen. Every single one. Michael looked directly into the camera, into my eyes, and said, "Motion carries. Congratulations, team. The future's bright." Then he ended the call. Just like that. 8 years of blood, sweat, and sacrifice voted away in under 3 minutes. And the worst part? He didn't even have the decency to do it in person. I sat there for a long time after the screen went black. The coffee went cold. The wind picked up outside, shaking the branches like they were trying to warn me. But I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just smiled. Because Michael Dalton didn't know one crucial thing about me. I don't fight in boardrooms. I fight in deeds. And a week before that vote, I'd already bought out every single one of those investors. They didn't vote me out of the company. They voted me out of a chair I already owned. The silence after that Zoom call wasn't empty. It was thick like wet wool pressed against your ears. The kind of quiet that doesn't just surround you. It invades you. I sat at that kitchen table for hours. Long after the sun dipped behind the ridge and the fireflies began their slow dance over the pasture. My coffee had gone cold, then room temperature, then forgotten. Outside, the wind carried the scent of damp earth and pine resin, Miriam's favorite smell after a summer rain. She used to say it meant the land was breathing. Now, it just felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see what I'd do. I didn't move. Not because I was numb, no, the pain was sharp, precise like a scalpel slicing through muscle, but because I needed to feel it. Every jagged edge. Every betrayal. Because if I ran from it, if I drowned it in whiskey or rage or denial, I'd lose the one thing that still mattered: clarity. Michael hadn't just tried to fire me. He'd tried to erase me. And he'd done it with the very people I'd trusted to guard the dream we built together. Let me take you back not to the boardroom, but to the beginning. Because betrayal doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's grown in the soil of trust, watered by loyalty, and harvested when you're looking the other way. I remember the first time Michael came out to the property. It was spring 2013. He drove up in a rented Tesla of all things and got stuck in the mud halfway down my driveway. I had to pull him out with my old Ford F-250, the one with the dent in the fender from when Lily was learning to drive. He laughed the whole time, covered in red clay, his designer loafers ruined. "You live like a pioneer, Richard," he said, wiping his brow. "But your mind, it's light years ahead." That night, we sat on the porch with 2 mason jars of sweet tea and a plate of cornbread Miriam had baked. She was still with us then, her hands still warm, her laugh still echoing through these walls. She listened as Michael talked about his vision. Clean energy for the forgotten places. Power for the powerless. Not just profit but purpose. Miriam looked at me, her eyes soft, and said, "This one's got heart, Richard. Don't let the suit fool you." I believed her. And I believed him. For years, I did the work no one saw. While Michael pitched in glass towers, I was elbow-deep in transformer boxes in the rain, rewiring a schoolhouse in Robbinsville that hadn't had reliable power since the 90s. I slept in my truck more nights than I care to count, wrapped in a wool blanket Miriam had stitched for me. I turned down offers from bigger firms because I believed in our mission, not just the tech, but the why behind it. And Michael, he gave speeches about grassroots innovation, while flying first class to Davos. He wore my name on his company letterhead like a badge of authenticity, then quietly shifted equity structures behind closed doors. Little things at first. A clause here. A voting right there. "Just paperwork, Richard," he'd say. "You know I'd never cut you out." But he was already cutting me out slice by invisible slice. The final insult wasn't the vote. It was the language. Rural sensibilities. As if my boots, my flannel, my refusal to sell out to some offshore conglomerate that was a liability. As if Miriam's memory, this land, the values I carried like heirlooms, were something to be managed away. I stood up finally, my knees stiff, and walked to the back porch. The night air was cool, carrying the distant hoot of an owl. I looked out over the 12 acres, my acres. The ones I'd walked with Miriam under starlight. The ones where Lily took her first steps. The ones I'd nearly lost when I mortgaged them to fund the company's first production run. I remember signing those papers in a lawyer's office downtown. Michael was there, clapping me on the back. "You're all in, brother," he said. "That's what I love about you." But he never put his house on the line. Never risked his comfort. Never lay awake wondering if the bank would take everything. No, he just waited until I'd built something worth stealing, then called a vote. The humiliation wasn't just professional. It was personal. It was spiritual. Because in trying to erase me, Michael had tried to erase Miriam too. Her belief in me. Her faith that a man could build something honest in a dishonest world. I went inside and walked down the hall to my study, the room I'd converted from the old nursery after Lily left for college. On the wall hung a framed photo, Miriam and me, standing in front of the first solar array we ever installed, back when it was just a dream sketched on a napkin. She's holding a wrench, grinning like she'd just won the lottery. I'm covered in grease, but my arms around her like I'd never let go. I touched the glass. "You were right about him," I whispered. "But you were right about me too." Then I turned to my desk. On it sat a manila folder labeled Project Phoenix. Inside were documents quiet, unassuming, but lethal. Bank transfer confirmations. Signed equity buyout agreements. Notarized letters of resignation from every board member except Michael. All dated October 7th, 2025, 1 week before the vote. I hadn't told anyone. Not Lily. Not my lawyer. Not even my closest friend, Hank, who runs the hardware store in town. This was between me and Michael. And the land. And Miriam's memory. But before I could act, I had to grieve. Not for the company. Not really. I grieved for the friendship I thought we had. For the late-night calls where he'd say, "You're the only one who gets it, Richard." For the handshake that started it all. That trust was real on my end, at least. And losing it hurt more than losing money ever could. I poured myself a glass of bourbon, Miriam's favorite brand, and sat on the porch swing. The wood creaked under my weight, the same rhythm it had for 20 years. I thought about Lily's wedding, just 3 months away. She'd chosen Whispering Oaks, of course. Said it was the only place that felt like home. What would she think if she knew her father had been cast out like yesterday's trash? Would she be ashamed? Angry? Disappointed? Or would she understand that sometimes dignity isn't given, it's taken back? The stars were bright that night. So many you could almost hear them hum. Miriam used to say they were the eyes of the ancestors, watching over us. I looked up and whispered, "What would you do, love?" The wind rustled the oaks. No answer. But I didn't need one. Because deep down I already knew. You don't beg for respect. You command it. And Michael Dalton was about to learn the difference. But not yet. First, I had to let the wound fester. Let the shame burn through me until all that was left was cold, clean purpose. I finished the bourbon. Set the glass on the railing. Then I went inside, locked the door, and began to plan. Not revenge. Justice. There's a difference. Revenge is fire. It consumes everything, even the one who lights it. Justice is steel. It cuts clean. It restores balance. And I intended to be the blade. There's a moment in every man's life, maybe only one, when the world stops making sense, and you have to decide, do I bend, or do I break? For me, that moment didn't come during the Zoom call. It didn't come when I read the email or stared at Miriam's photo. It came 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning so ordinary it felt like a taunt. I was at the post office in Black Mountain, picking up a package of replacement diodes for a solar inverter I was repairing for a local beekeeper. The air smelled of diesel and fresh-baked bread from the cafe next door. A kid on a skateboard rattled past, laughing. Life, humming along like nothing had changed. Then my phone buzzed. It was Lily. "Dad." Her voice was tight. "Did you see the press release?" I hadn't. I'd been avoiding news, emails, even my own inbox. Living in a kind of self-imposed exile, tending to the land like it could heal me. "No," I said. "What press release?" She exhaled. Shaky. "Dalton and Calloway. They announced a strategic realignment. Said you're stepping down to pursue personal interests." They quoted Michael saying, "Richard's legacy is foundational, but the future demands new leadership." I stood there, holding the package, the brown paper rough against my palm. Around me, people chatted, cars idled, a dog barked. Normalcy, thick and suffocating. "And?" I asked, my voice flat. "And, Dad, people are calling me." Aunt Carol saw it on LinkedIn. The caterer for the wedding asked if the venue's still stable. "They're acting like you failed. Like you got pushed out because you couldn't keep up." There it was. Not just the betrayal but the narrative. Michael wasn't just taking the company. He was rewriting history. Painting me as a well-meaning but outdated relic, useful for the origin story, but irrelevant to the future. And in doing so, he was dragging my name, my daughter's name, Miriam's memory, through the mud of public perception. That's when something inside me snapped. Not loudly. Not with shouting or smashing glass. But with a quiet final click, like a rifle bolt sliding into place. I looked down at my hands. These hands had built inverters from scrap. Held Miriam as she took her last breath. Taught Lily how to split firewood. They were calloused, scarred, honest. And I realized I had been waiting for permission to fight. Permission from Michael. From the board. From some invisible rulebook that said, "Good men don't retaliate." But Miriam never taught me to be good. She taught me to be true. And the truth was this: I hadn't been voted out of anything. I owned the company. Every share. Every patent. Every server in that sleek Biltmore Park office. Michael just didn't know it yet. I took a deep breath. The scent of pine and diesel filled my lungs. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, so calm it surprised even me. "Lily," I said, "don't worry about the caterer. Or Aunt Carol. Or Michael Dalton's fairy tales." "Dad, what are you going to do?" I looked up at the sky, clear, endless, indifferent. "I'm going to remind him who built this." I hung up, walked to my truck, and drove straight to my lawyer's office in Asheville. "His name is Ben Harlan. We went to high school together. He's the kind of man who wears suspenders unironically and keeps a bottle of rye in his bottom drawer for emergencies. He also happens to be one of the sharpest corporate attorneys in Western North Carolina. When I walked in, he was reading a deposition, glasses perched on his nose. He looked up, saw my face, and closed the file. "Richard," he said, "you look like a man who's either about to bury someone or dig them up." I sat down, placed the Project Phoenix folder on his desk. "I need you to activate Clause 14B of the original operating agreement," I said. "The one about unilateral board dissolution in the event of majority equity consolidation." Ben blinked. Then slowly, a grin spread across his face. "You didn't." "I did." He opened the folder, scanned the documents, whistled low. "You bought out all 4 investors, in secret, using a blind trust?" "Used the land as collateral," I said. "Sold a conservation easement on the back 40 to a non-profit. Clean money. Untraceable to me until the transfer was complete." "You son of a gun," he laughed. "Michael thinks he just fired you. But you've been the sole controlling shareholder for 9 days. 10, I corrected. Ben leaned back, steepling his fingers. "So what's the play?" I looked out his window at the Blue Ridge Mountains, hazy in the distance. I let him celebrate. Let him announce his new era. Let him sign contracts, hire staff, make promises. All under the assumption he's in charge. And then, I turned back, meeting his eyes. Then I call a board meeting. Ben's grin turned wolfish. Of one. Exactly. But it wasn't just about legal technicalities. It was about theater. About making sure the world saw what really happened not through press releases, but through undeniable, public truth. Because Michael hadn't just betrayed a business partner. He'd humiliated a man in front of his daughter, his community, his dead wife's memory. And in this part of the world, that kind of disrespect doesn't go unanswered. That night, I went back to Whispering Oaks. The wedding arch was already up, white birch branches woven with fairy lights. Lily had chosen it herself. I ran my hand along the wood, thinking about how she'd stand there in a few months, full of hope, trusting the world to be kind. I couldn't let Michael's lie stain that moment, so I made a decision. I wouldn't just reclaim the company. I'd reclaim the story. And I'd do it where it mattered most, in front of everyone who'd ever believed in us. But first, I needed one more thing. Confirmation. I called Marcus, the CFO, the smirking yes-man who'd raised his hand so eagerly during the vote. I used a burner phone. Let it ring 7 times before he answered, voice groggy. "Hello, Marcus," I said, voice low. "It's Richard." Silence. Then wary. "Richard? I didn't expect to hear from you." "Neither did I said. "But I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "For voting me out. For believing Michael's version of the truth. For choosing the suit over the soul." He laughed nervously. "Come on, Richard. It wasn't personal. Just business." "Funny," I said. "Because I remember you telling Michael last month that I was a liability in investor meetings. That my country manners made people uncomfortable." Another silence. Longer this time. "How did you?" "I keep my ears open, Marcus. Always have." I paused. Let the fear sink in. "Enjoy your new title," I said softly. "You'll have it for about 10 days. Then I hung up. I didn't need to hear his panic. I could feel it radiating through the phone like heat from a dying fire. That night, I slept better than I had in months. Because for the first time since the vote, I wasn't the victim. I was the architect. And the foundation of Michael's new empire? It was built on sand. Mine was built on bedrock. The breaking point wasn't rage. It was clarity. And now that I had it, there was no turning back. There's a moment in every man's life, maybe only one, when the world stops making sense, and you have to decide, do I bend, or do I break? For me, That moment didn't come during the Zoom call. It didn't come when I read the email or stared at Miriam's photo. It came 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning so ordinary it felt like a taunt. I was at the post office in Black Mountain, picking up a package of replacement diodes for a solar inverter I was repairing for a local beekeeper named Earl. Earl's hives had been failing because his old generator kept surging during storms, frying his temperature monitors. He couldn't afford a new system, so I'd rigged him a microgrid using salvaged panels and a refurbished battery bank. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. And in this part of the world, working matters more than polish. The air smelled of diesel from the idling mail truck and fresh sourdough from the bakery next door, Bessie's Hearth, where Miriam used to buy cinnamon rolls every Sunday. I'd walked in there just last week and the new girl behind the counter didn't even know who I was. That stung more than I expected. Not because I needed recognition, but because Miriam's name used to open doors around here. Now, it felt like even memory was fading. I signed for the package, my knuckles rough from splitting oak the night before. My boots left faint red prints on the linoleum Asheville clay, stubborn as grief. I was about to head back to the truck when my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Lily. "Dad." Her voice was tight, like she'd been holding her breath. "Did you see the press release?" I hadn't. I'd been avoiding news, emails, even my own inbox. Living in a kind of self-imposed exile, tending to the land like it could heal me. Some mornings, I'd wake before dawn and walk the perimeter of the property, checking fence lines, listening to the creek, talking to Miriam like she was still there. It wasn't madness. It was maintenance. You tend your soul the same way you tend your soil, quietly, consistently, with your hands. "No," I said. "What press release?" She exhaled. Shaky. "Dalton and Callaway. They announced a strategic realignment. Said you're stepping down to pursue personal interests." They quoted Michael saying, "Richard's legacy is foundational, but the future demands new leadership." I stood there, holding the package, the brown paper rough against my palm. Around me, people chatted about football and grocery lists. A UPS driver whistled as he loaded boxes. Life, humming along like nothing had changed. "And," I asked, my voice flat, "and, Dad, people are calling me." Aunt Carol saw it on LinkedIn. The caterer for the wedding asked if the venue's still stable. "They're acting like you failed. Like you got pushed out because you couldn't keep up." There it was. Not just the betrayal but the narrative. Michael wasn't just taking the company. He was rewriting history. Painting me as a well-meaning but outdated relic useful for the origin story, but irrelevant to the future. And in doing so, he was dragging my name, my daughter's name, Miriam's memory, through the mud of public perception. That's when something inside me snapped. Not loudly. Not with shouting or smashing glass. But with a quiet final click like a rifle bolt sliding into place. I looked down at my hands. These hands had built inverters from scrap. Held Miriam as she took her last breath in that hospital bed, her fingers cold despite the blankets. Taught Lily how to split firewood when she was 12, her braids swinging with every swing of them all. They were calloused, scarred, honest. And I realized, I had been waiting for permission to fight. Permission from Michael. From the board. From some invisible rulebook that said good men don't retaliate. But Miriam never taught me to be good. She taught me to be true. And the truth was this: I hadn't been voted out of anything. I owned the company. Every share. Every patent. Every server in that sleek Biltmore Park office. Michael just didn't know it yet. I took a deep breath. The scent of pine and diesel filled my lungs. My voice, when I spoke, was calm, so calm it surprised even me. "Lily," I said, "don't worry about the caterer. Or Aunt Carol. Or Michael Dalton's fairy tales. Dad, what are you going to do?" I looked up at the sky, clear, endless, indifferent. "I'm going to remind him who built this." I hung up, walked to my truck, and drove straight to my lawyer's office in Asheville. His name is Ben Harlan. We went to high school together. He played linebacker, I ran track. He once broke 3 ribs tackling a kid twice his size just to prove a point. Now he wears suspenders unironically and keeps a bottle of rye in his bottom drawer for emergencies. He also happens to be one of the sharpest corporate attorneys in Western North Carolina, and one of the few people who knew Miriam well enough to call her Mim to her face. When I walked in, he was reading a deposition, glasses perched on his nose, one foot propped on a filing cabinet. He looked up, saw my face, and closed the file. "Richard," he said, "you look like a man who's either about to bury someone or dig them up." I sat down in the worn leather chair across from his desk, the same one I'd sat in when we drafted the original partnership agreement with Michael. The wood was scarred with coffee rings and pen marks. I remembered Miriam sitting right here, arms crossed, saying, "You better make sure that say clause is ironclad, Richard. City boys have a way of redefining words." I placed the Project Phoenix folder on his desk. "I need you to activate Clause 14B of the original operating agreement," I said. "The one about unilateral board dissolution in the event of majority equity consolidation." Ben blinked. Then slowly, a grin spread across his face like sunrise over a ridge. "You didn't." "I did." He opened the folder, scanned the documents, whistled low. "You bought out all 4 investors, in secret, using a blind trust?" "Used the land as collateral," I said. "Sold a conservation easement on the back 40 to the Appalachian Land Trust. Clean money. Untraceable to me until the transfer was complete. The trust dissolved the day after the vote." "You son of a gun," he laughed, shaking his head. "Michael thinks he just fired you. But you've been the sole controlling shareholder for 9 days. 10, I corrected. Ben leaned back, steepling his fingers. "So what's the play?" I looked out his window at the Blue Ridge Mountains, hazy in the distance, the same view Miriam and I used to watch from our porch swing. I let him celebrate. Let him announce his new era. Let him sign contracts, hire staff, make promises. All under the assumption he's in charge. And then, I turned back, meeting his eyes. Then I call a board meeting. Ben's grin turned wolfish. Of one. Exactly. But it wasn't just about legal technicalities. It was about theater. About making sure the world saw what really happened not through press releases, but through undeniable, public truth. Because Michael hadn't just betrayed a business partner. He'd humiliated a man in front of his daughter, his community, his dead wife's memory. And in this part of the world, that kind of disrespect doesn't go unanswered. That night, I went back to Whispering Oaks. The wedding arch was already up, white birch branches woven with fairy lights, just like Lily wanted. I ran my hand along the wood, thinking about how she'd stand there in a few months, full of hope, trusting the world to be kind. I couldn't let Michael's lie stain that moment. So I made a decision. I wouldn't just reclaim the company. I'd reclaim the story. And I'd do it where it mattered most, in front of everyone who'd ever believed in us. But first, I needed confirmation. I called Marcus, the CFO, the smirking yes-man who'd raised his hand so eagerly during the vote. I used a burner phone I kept in the glove box for emergencies. Let it ring 7 times before he answered, voice groggy, probably half asleep in his downtown condo. "Hello, Marcus," I said, voice low. "It's Richard." Silence. Then wary. "Richard? I didn't expect to hear from you." "Neither did I said. "But I wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" "For voting me out. For believing Michael's version of the truth. For choosing the suit over the soul." He laughed. Nervously. "Come on, Richard. It wasn't personal. Just business." "Funny," I said. "Because I remember you telling Michael last month that I was a liability in investor meetings. That my country manners made people uncomfortable." Another silence. Longer this time. "How did you?" "I keep my ears open, Marcus. Always have." I paused. Let the fear sink in. "Enjoy your new title," I said softly. "You'll have it for about 10 days. Then I hung up. I didn't need to hear his panic. I could feel it radiating through the phone like heat from a dying fire. But the real test came the next morning. I got a call from Hank, the owner of Hank's Hardware, my oldest friend in town. We'd been fixing tractors together since we were kids. "Richard," he said, voice strained, "you gonna be okay?" "Why wouldn't I be? Saw the news. People are talking. Some folks saying you lost your edge. That Michael's the real brains." I gripped the phone tighter. "And what do you think, Hank?" He was quiet for a beat. Then, "I think a man who can wire a solar array in a thunderstorm and still show up to help his neighbor roof a barn the next day ain't lost nothing." That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about me. It was about every man and woman who'd ever been told they were too rural, too rough, too real for the polished world of suits and spreadsheets. Michael hadn't just dismissed me, he'd dismissed us. Our values, our way of life, our dignity. And that was unforgivable. That night, I went out to the workshop behind the house, the same one where I'd built the first prototype. Dust motes floated in the beam of my headlamp. Tools hung in precise order on pegboard. Wrenches, pliers, soldering iron. Miriam used to bring me coffee out here, set it on the workbench without a word, then disappear back into the house like a ghost who knew when to leave a man to his thoughts. I opened the safe behind the anvil. Inside wasn't money or guns, just a single USB drive labeled Phoenix Final. On it, every email, every contract, every transfer confirmation. The entire paper trail of my silent takeover. I plugged it into my laptop, scrolled through the files, saw the date stamps, the signatures. The moment I became the sole owner of everything Michael thought he'd stolen. And I smiled. Not a cruel smile. Not a vengeful one. A relieved smile. Because for the first time since the vote, I wasn't the victim. I was the architect. And the foundation of Michael's new empire? It was built on sand. Mine was built on bedrock. But the breaking point wasn't rage. It was clarity. And now that I had it, there was no turning back. I shut down the laptop, put the drive back in the safe, and walked outside. The moon was full, casting long shadows across the pasture. Crickets sang. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the valley, a sound Miriam used to say meant someone was coming home. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the cool night air. Then I whispered, "All right, love. Let's show them how a Callaway finishes what he starts." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was agreement. Justice doesn't happen by accident. It's built slowly, deliberately, like a stone wall on a mountainside. One careful placement at a time. One decision that seems small but holds the whole structure together. After that night in the workshop, I stopped reacting. I started orchestrating. The first thing I did was disappear. Not physically, I was still at Whispering Oaks, still splitting wood, still fixing Earl's inverter, but I vanished from the narrative Michael was selling. No interviews. No social media. No angry calls to old colleagues. I let the silence grow until it became a presence of its own. People started wondering, is Richard broken? Has he given up? Let them wonder. While they whispered, I worked. Ben Harlan and I met every other morning at 6 a.m. in his office. Coffee steaming, blinds drawn. We pored over the company bylaws like monks studying sacred texts. Every clause, every loophole, every forgotten provision from the original 2012 agreement. "You realize," Ben said one morning, tapping a paragraph with his pen, "if you invoke Section 9D, you can void every executive contract signed after the equity shift, including Michael's new CEO agreement." I nodded. "And if we time it right, he'll have already committed the company to a $2 million licensing deal with that German firm. Deal collapses. Reputation implodes." Ben whistled. "You're not just taking back the company, Richard. You're turning his ambition into a noose." "Poetic," I said. "But necessary. I wasn't doing this for spite. I was doing it for deterrence. So the next Michael Dalton would think twice before trying to erase a man like me. But legal maneuvering wasn't enough. I needed witnesses. Proof. A moment so undeniable, so public, that no press release could spin it away. That's when I remembered the annual Green Energy Summit in Charlotte 3 weeks away. Michael had already announced he'd be giving the keynote, "The future is streamlined. Why legacy founders must step aside." He was going to use my company, my technology, to preach the gospel of my own obsolescence. Perfect. I called Lily. "Dad," she said when she answered. "Are you okay?" "You've been so quiet." "I'm better than okay," I said. "I need your help." She hesitated. "With what?" "The wedding venue. I want to host a small reception after the summit. For investors, partners, local press. Say it's to celebrate the next chapter of Dalton and Callaway." Lily was sharp. She caught the edge in my voice. "You're not stepping aside, are you?" "No," I said. "I'm stepping up." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Do you need me to lie?" "No," I said. "Just don't correct anyone who assumes I'm out. Let them believe it right up to the moment I prove otherwise." She exhaled, almost a laugh. "Oh, Dad, you're gonna break him, aren't you?" "I'm gonna restore balance," I said. "There's a difference." Next, I reached out to our lead engineer, Rosa Mendez. She'd been with us since year 2. Built half the firmware in our systems with her own hands. Michael had tried to poach her loyalty with a promotion, but she'd stayed quiet, watching. I met her at a diner off I-40, booth in the back, rain tapping the window. "You bought them all out," she said before I even sat down. "Not a question. A statement." "How'd you know?" "Marcus bragged at happy hour. Said the board finally got rid of the dead weight. But when I checked the SEC filings, the trust name matched your daughter's middle name." I smiled faintly. Lily's middle name was Miriam. Only family knew. "Michael doesn't know," she said. "No." She stirred her coffee, eyes sharp. "What do you need me to do?" "2 things," I said. "First, keep the team calm. Tell them nothing's changing on the tech side. Second, on Summit Day, I need you to present the new firmware update. The one I designed." She nodded slowly. "The one Michael tried to kill because it slowed down commercial rollout?" "The same." She leaned forward. "He's gonna be furious when he sees it live on stage." "Good," I said. "Let him be." The final piece was the venue. Whispering Oaks wasn't just a wedding site. It was my ground, my sanctuary, and now my stage. I spent days preparing, not just cleaning, curating. I hung string lights in the Oaks just like Lily would for her wedding. Set up long farmhouse tables with mason jars and wildflowers. Had Hank bring over his old tractor as a backdrop, rusted but proud, like me. And in the center of it all, I placed a single chair. Not a throne. Not a CEO's leather executive seat. Just a simple wooden chair hand-carved from a fallen oak on this very property. Miriam had sanded it smooth the summer before she died. I'd kept it in the barn all these years. Now it would sit empty until I claimed it. The night before the summit, I drove to Biltmore Park. Not to the office, to the parking lot across the street. I watched as Michael's Tesla pulled in, sleek and silent. He stepped out in a charcoal suit, phone to his ear, gesturing like he owned the skyline. He didn't even look toward the old warehouse district where I'd built our first prototype. He'd forgotten where it all began. And that was his fatal mistake. Back at home, I laid out my clothes for the next day. Dark jeans, black boots, a deep green flannel, Miriam's favorite, and over it, a simple black blazer. Not a suit. Not a costume. Just me. At 5 a.m., I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the mist rise off the creek. The land felt still, expectant. Ben called. "Everything's filed. The board dissolution goes live at 9 a.m. tomorrow, right after Michael's keynote." "Good," I said. "You ready?" I looked out at the oaks, their leaves shimmering in the dawn light. "I've been ready for 10 years. Because this wasn't just about Michael. It was about proving that a man who works with his hands, who honors his word,
who builds from the soil up, can't be erased by a vote.
He can only be revealed. And tomorrow, the world would see who really owned the chair.
The Charlotte Convention Center hummed with the kind of energy only money and ambition can create.
Crystal chandeliers. Polished marble floors. Men in tailored suits and women in silk blazers sipping overpriced lattes while discussing disruption like it was a sacrament.
I walked in at 8:45 a.m., alone, unnoticed.
No entourage. No press badge. Just a man in a flannel shirt and boots, carrying a leather satchel that held nothing but a notebook, a pen, and a single USB drive labeled Phoenix, Live. Security gave me a once-over, probably wondering if I was lost, or staff, but I nodded politely and kept walking. I'd spent years in rooms like this, always the odd one out, always the one they called the builder, like it was a quaint hobby. Today, I wasn't here to fit in. I was here to end something. I took a seat in the back row of the main auditorium, far from the stage, near an emergency exit. From here, I could see everything and be seen by no one. The room filled quickly. Investors, tech journalists, competitors pretending to be allies. And there, front and center, sat Marcus, smug as ever, whispering to a woman in a sharp navy suit, probably the new COO Michael had hired without telling anyone. Then the lights dimmed. Applause swelled as Michael Dalton stepped onto the stage. He looked radiant. Tailored navy suit. Hair perfect. Smile calibrated for maximum charm.
He adjusted the mic, scanned the crowd, and began.
"Good morning," he said, voice smooth as aged whiskey. "It's an honor to stand before you today, not just as CEO of Dalton and Callaway Energy Solutions, but as a steward of a vision that began over a decade ago, with two men who believed rural America deserved more than scraps from the energy table." I almost laughed. He spoke of evolution, of necessary pruning, of how founders, no matter how brilliant, sometimes become anchors rather than sails. He never said my name, but everyone knew who he meant. He showed slides, charts of growth, maps of new markets, renderings of sleek new products that looked nothing like the rugged, reliable systems I designed. Then he announced the German licensing deal, a $2.3 million partnership that proves our technology is ready for the global stage. The crowd applauded. Cameras flashed. And then he said it, the line that sealed his fate. "The future," he declared, "belongs to those who aren't afraid to leave the past behind." I stood up. Not dramatically. Not with fanfare. Just stood. And walked down the center aisle. Heads turned. Murmurs rippled through the room. Michael saw me. His smile faltered for half a second, just long enough for me to know he was rattled. I kept walking. Straight to the stage. Security moved toward me, but I held up a hand. "I'm Richard Callaway, co-founder, and I believe I'm still on the cap table." That got a nervous laugh. Michael recovered fast. "Richard, what a surprise. We weren't expecting you." "You wouldn't be," I said, stepping onto the stage. I turned to the audience. "But I think you'll all want to hear what I have to say." I walked to the podium, gently nudged Michael aside, not aggressively, but with the quiet authority of a man who knows he belongs. He stepped back, eyes narrowed, but didn't protest. Not yet. I plugged my USB drive into the laptop connected to the main screen. The room fell silent. "What you just heard," I said, "is a beautiful story. But it's not the true one." I clicked. The screen changed. Not to a slide. To a live feed of the North Carolina Secretary of State's Business Registry. There, in black and white, was the updated ownership record for Dalton and Callaway Energy Solutions, LLC. Sole member, Richard Callaway. Effective date, October 7th, 2025. Gasp. Whispered exclamations. Someone dropped a pen. Michael's face went pale. That's impossible. The board you voted with," I said calmly, "no longer exists. Because as of 10 days ago, I own 100% of the company. Every share. Every patent. Every server in that Biltmore Park office. I turned to him. You didn't vote me out, Michael. You voted yourself out of a chair I already owned. The room erupted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Investors stood up, shouting questions. Marcus looked like he might vomit. But I wasn't done. Rosa, I said into the mic. From the side door, Rosa Mendez walked in, holding a tablet. She nodded at me, then tapped the screen. Suddenly, every demo unit in the exhibit hall, dozens of them powered on simultaneously. Not with the watered-down commercial firmware Michael had approved, but with version 7.3, the one I had designed, rugged, secure, optimized for off-grid resilience. The crowd turned toward the hall, stunned. This, I said, is the real future. Not sleek packaging. Not global deals that compromise our core mission. But this power that works when the world goes dark. Power built by people who live where it's needed most. I looked at Michael. You called my rural sensibilities a liability. But they're our strength. And you tried to sell them away for a headline. He stepped forward, voice low, desperate. Richard, we can talk. This doesn't have to be public. It's already public, I said. And it's already over. Then I did the one thing no one expected. I walked to the edge of the stage, looked out at the crowd, and said, Whispering Oaks, my home, 12 acres outside Asheville, is hosting a reception tonight. All are welcome. Come see what real energy looks like. Not in a boardroom. In the soil. In the sun. In the hands of people who build to last. I turned off the mic and walked off the stage. Michael stood there, frozen, as the room emptied around him, some rushing to the exhibit hall, others calling their lawyers, a few approaching me with outstretched hands and apologies in their eyes. But I didn't stop. I had a reception to prepare. As I drove back to Asheville, the mountains rising like old friends on the horizon, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Peace. Not because I'd won, but because I'd shown up as myself. And that was enough. The reception at Whispering Oaks didn't feel like a victory party. It felt like a homecoming. By the time I got back, Lily and a handful of loyal staff had already set up everything: string lights glowing in the oaks, long tables draped in burlap, mason jars filled with goldenrod and Queen Anne's lace. A bluegrass trio played softly near the creek, fiddles weaving through the evening air like smoke. And in the center of it all, the chair. The one Miriam had sanded. The one I'd kept in the barn for 10 years. Now it sat under the arch, empty, waiting. Guests began arriving just after sunset. Not the polished crowd from Charlotte, but the real ones. Earl the beekeeper, Rosa and half the engineering team, Hank with a cooler of local beer, even old Mrs. Peabody from the co-op in Robbinsville who'd been running our system since 2015. And then, to my surprise, investors showed up too, some from the summit, others who'd heard the news and wanted to see for themselves. They came in suits, but they took them off. They walked barefoot in the grass. They asked how the panels held up in hail. They listened. No one mentioned Michael. Not because they were afraid to, but because he no longer mattered. By 9 o'clock, the German licensing deal had collapsed. Marcus resigned via email. The board, what was left of it, issued a public statement confirming my sole ownership and apologizing for misaligned governance. Michael. He disappeared. His LinkedIn went dark. His Tesla was towed from the office lot 3 days later. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice isn't about watching your enemy fall. It's about standing tall while they crumble beside you. A week after the summit, I got a call from Lily. Dad, she said, voice soft. The caterer apologized. Said she heard the whole thing on the news live stream. She wants to bring extra pie for the wedding. I smiled. Tell her peach is Miriam's favorite. She knows, Lily said. Everyone knows now. That's when I realized this wasn't just about reclaiming a company. It was about reclaiming a name. For weeks, I'd carried the weight of being seen as the guy who got pushed out. Now, I was the man who built it and took it back without firing a shot. But the real change wasn't in headlines. It was quieter. Apprentices started showing up at the workshop again, kids from nearby towns who'd heard I was taking on students. Want to learn how to build something that lasts? I'd ask. They'd nod, eyes wide. And I'd hand them a soldering iron and say, "Start here." I reopened the R&D lab in the old warehouse. Not with venture capital. With pre-orders from co-ops and homesteaders who believed in the mission. We called it Callaway Core, no partner's name. Just mine. Not out of ego, but clarity. This was my work. My legacy. And I wouldn't let anyone dilute it again. One evening, as I sat on the porch swing with a glass of sweet tea, Rosa came by. She'd stayed on as CTO. "You could have sued him," she said, leaning against the railing. "Taken everything." "I did," I said. "I took back my dignity. That's worth more than money." She nodded. "He called me yesterday. Begged for a reference." "What did you say?" "I told him to ask you." I laughed a real laugh. The kind that starts deep in your chest. "Tell him to come split wood with me. If he lasts a morning, I'll write him a letter." She grinned. "He won't last an hour." "No," I said. "He won't. But the truth is, I don't hate Michael. I pity him. Because he thought power came from titles and votes and press releases. He never understood that real power comes from the land, from your hands, from the quiet certainty that you've built something honest. And you can't vote that away." A month later, I stood in the same spot where Michael had tried to erase me, now my office again, and signed a new contract. Not with a German conglomerate, but with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. We'd be installing microgrids in 3 remote communities, using the version 7.3 firmware. No profit margin. Just partnership. As I signed my name Richard Callaway, I thought of Miriam. She'd be proud. Not because I won, but because I stayed true. The wedding is in 6 weeks. Lily's dress arrived last Tuesday. She modeled it for me in the living room, twirling under the same ceiling fan we'd installed the summer she turned 10. I cried. Not from sadness, from fullness. This land has seen loss, but it's also seen rebirth. The dogwoods will bloom again. The creek will keep singing. And Whispering Oaks will hold another "I do," this time with my daughter at the center, surrounded by people who know what it means to stand by your word. I still walk the perimeter every morning. Still talk to Miriam. But now, I don't just tell her about the pain. I tell her about the peace. About how justice isn't a storm, it's a slow, steady rain that washes the lies away and lets the truth grow. Michael thought he could freeze me out with a board vote. But you can't freeze out a man who's already rooted in bedrock. You can't shame a man who knows his worth. And you sure as hell can't vote out of a chair. A man who already owns the whole damn table. So if you're watching this, if you've ever been told you're too country, too rough, too real for the polished world, remember this. Your hands built something. Your heart held it together. And no vote, no lie, no slick-talking suit can take that away. Because the land remembers. And so do I.